When did visual effects look the best? You'd think it'd be right now because the artists are constantly evolving the craft and the technology can only get better. But if you've seen a recent blockbuster, you know that's not the case and that there's other factors you have to weigh in, like time and budget. And more specifically, how much of the time and budget can you withhold from the post department?
Surprised to see me.
So maybe visual effects have already peaked. I bet you're already reminiscing about a decade like the 80s, 90s, or 2000s and thinking that's when visual effects looked the best. But you're forgetting the bad movies that also came out at these times. For every film with mind-blowing visuals, there's another from that same year that looks, let's just say, not finished. This makes it too tricky to define a golden age of visual effects. However, I couldn't care less about when people think visual effects peaked. I'm here to argue something else, something better than a golden age. I want to tell you about a time in VFX history when the artists were more than just names and a list of credits, but they were celebrities. When young filmmakers didn't have to go to film school to get their hands on some sweet software, when anyone could be their own action hero. But we were all Neo. This was the rock and roll era of visual effects, and nothing better represents this movement than the two music videos from the My Chemical Romance album, Danger Days, The True Lives of the Fabulous Killjoys. While all the VFX artists watch this might already have a solid idea of this era and what made it so rock and roll, I should probably define it for the rest of you because I understand how cringe it is to say something as nerdy as visual effects as once being rock and roll.
Like what?
And if you are a VFX artist watching this, I know that the title should really be the rock and roll era of compositing, but considering Google Docs keeps auto-correcting that word to composing, I think I'm gonna keep it how it is. So what is the rock and roll era? When were visual effects ever loud or rebellious, or dare I say, sexy? Let's break it down into the three pillars that defined this era, what they meant at the time, how they stood out, and most importantly, how they parallel the history and attitude of rock and roll. First, YouTube. In the late 2000s, YouTube was the perfect platform for visual effects artists to independently show their work to the largest audience possible. Anybody of any age or level of experience could try out a visual effect, upload it, and get a ton of views. And since there wasn't a need to hire actors, visual effects artists themselves just hopped in front of the camera and for the first time in history, got to be the action heroes. Before this, the general public had no clue what a VFX artist looked like. They probably just assumed they were all nerds obsessed with computers and video games. And they were right.
Oppan Gangnam Style.
Now yes, before YouTube, there were other websites that VFX artists could upload their work to. A popular one was HitFilm. It was a great platform for amateur filmmakers to upload their short films. It was like the website if you were a new VFX artist. Just like how Newgrounds was the place to be if you were an animator. And DeviantArt was great if you were like a pervert or something. But while these sites were great for connecting with artists and getting feedback, they rarely reached outside their communities because the average person just wants to watch something. They don't have the foresight to know what genre or medium they want. They don't know when they're craving VFX and should go to HitFilm. They don't know when they want an animation from Newgrounds. DeviantArt actually did have the advantage here because people do know when they want to beat their meat. But YouTube, on the other hand, attracted both artists and normies. That is what made it such a land of opportunity. Maybe your action movie only got a couple of views on HitFilm and a comment saying your effects suck. But you put a short film on YouTube with some kick-ass effects, Hollywood might knock at your door.
It wasn't 2 weeks after I posted on YouTube. The first call that I got, like a phone call, was from Warner Brothers. And I was sure it was one of my friends. So I was like, oh yeah, sure. You want to make a movie? You're sure, why not? And by the middle of the conversation, I realized this guy's it's actually from Warner Brothers.
That was Fede Alvarez, by the way, the director of the 2013 Evil Dead and Alien Romulus. He first got recognized with the power of YouTube. Now, YouTube started in 2005, but this era, I'd argue, started taking off in like 2008 or 2009. Before then, obviously there were other videos uploaded that contained visual effects, but those were like music videos, clips from movies, things made with a budget. They were videos, but they weren't YouTube videos. When I think of the first YouTube video that had visual effects, I think of Freddie W's real-life portal gun. It's the earliest example of a classic, homegrown YouTube skit that's centered around a visual effect. Maybe not the earliest, that's going to be impossible to find out, but it's the video that Freddie Wong cites as the one that launched his YouTube channel. And let's be honest, Freddie Wong is the face of rock and roll visual effects. I know Corridor Digital was also a big name at this time and they still make videos today. And there's also Mike Diva who doesn't get enough credit, but he's the reason other big YouTubers had VFX in their videos. But Freddie W really set the tone of rock and roll VFX. His videos were often referential to things like video games. There was always an element of comedy. He never took himself too seriously. But above all, there was action. And what rebellious teenager doesn't want to make an action movie with their friends? Like, I'm older now and more sophisticated when it comes to visual effects. I can enjoy a nice set extension, but damn it, artists like Freddie, Brandon, Sam, and Nico, those bastards tricked an entire generation into this industry with their sick studio and sweet airsoft guns. Not to mention the films from this period were loaded with some of the best visual effects of all time. Iron Man, Transformers, Pirates of the Caribbean. I'm sure those also played a part in creating this new generation of visual effects artists, but I would argue those movies were less of a catalyst and more like binding agents. They only cemented the idea of learning visual effects. They didn't put it in your head the same way that YouTubers did. Like, everyone loves to talk about how great the effects were for Davy Jones and Pirates of the Caribbean, but I don't know any kid that was eager to go home and learn CGI just to put tentacles on their face. At least not the same way that Corridor Digital made you want to spray paint your Nerf guns. This is what separates this time in visual effects from all the others. These guys inspired millions overnight, and I think that's a fair comparison to rock and roll. The idea of these independent artists getting their inspiration not from the origin of the art form, but instead from other artists that were just making the best that they could with what they had. That's like the foundation of rock. You think Wolfmother listened to Wolfgang Mozart? You think Greta Van Fleet studied Ludwig van Beethoven? No, they both worshipped Led Zeppelin.
So when you learn to play the guitar, you have to, I think, start by imitating other people. I don't think there is another way.
For some reason, Clapton was the only one that really touched me. The guy that made me want to play.
Johnny Be Good. Knocked me out. Floored me.
There's my ticket for the Bill Haley show in 1958, the Palace Theatre in Manchester, that changed my life.
We only have Joy Division because Bernard Sumner and Peter Hook saw the Sex Pistols. We only have the Rolling Stones because of Keith Richards' obsession with the Beatles. And George Bush did MCR. But if that's all Freddie W. and these other YouTubers did, make a funny skit with visual effects and upload it to YouTube, they wouldn't be as revered as they are today. What made them legends to so many visual effects artists was their behind-the-scenes videos and tutorials. One day they'd upload a video that does some weird-ass effect, and later that week, there's a full-ass mini documentary on how they created it. Like Corridor's Brush with Death VFX Breakdown was where I first learned about the concept of camera mapping and projection. Filmright was another great YouTube channel that would recreate effects from popular movies, but with a fraction of the budget.
Watch for Ricochet!
What? Oh God, Bruno, get down!
Zach King, before he was known as the TikTok, Vine, Instagram guy, he would make VFX tutorials.
What's up? Zachary King here with a Final Cut Pro tutorial. Just gonna be showing you how to do the annoying orange effect.
Videos like these and thousands of others on YouTube really began to break the idea that you need to go to film school to learn visual effects, because visual effects wasn't the same beast that it was in the 70s when artists had to engineer motion control rigs from scratch, or in the 80s when they had to code their own software. By 2010, an 11-year-old could teach you basic compositing.
Hey, I'm Quentin, and this is my very first Adobe After Effects tutorial.
You didn't need a degree, you just needed a computer. Same goes for rock. You don't need music theory, you don't need a catchy melody. Your guitar doesn't even have to be in tune most of the time. You just have to start playing.
People thought I was weird because I would stay home on weekends, on Friday and Saturday night, play my guitar. But then when I got good at playing guitar, boy, I got old pussy I wanted.
And the best way to practice visual effects was to make short films with your buddies. Whether it was an original IP or recreating whatever action movie released that summer, just go out and blow something up. The ability to do this, to make a short film for cheap and with like 3 people, once again further distanced many young filmmakers from the idea of big Hollywood. The idea that you need a ton of people and a bunch of money to make movies. Like, what the fuck is a VFX supervisor? The director, who's also holding the camera, is gonna do the effects later. He knows how to film it. That's rock and roll, being the loudest with the fewest people. It's not a pop song with 10 writers or an orchestra with 20 violins. It's the singer also playing the guitar. Or fuck, the guitar also playing the bass.
great sound.
Yeah, it's fabulous.
Because I always thought it was
Jimmy,
a
could you,
bass that opened the song.
And as much as I want to say that we don't see this mentality anymore, it actually just won an Academy Award. Godzilla Minus One recently took home the Oscar for Best Visual Effects because the director, Takashi Yamazaki, was also the visual effects supervisor. And not only was he hands-on throughout the entire pre-production process and obviously filming, but when it came time to post-production, he didn't fuck around. He actually put all of his artists on one floor, so if they ever needed anything, feedback, or a shot approved, he could roll his chair over to them in a second and get it done. Modern directors could learn a lot from this about the importance of working with the visual effects teams. They won't, but they could. But they won't. The entire production of Godzilla Minus One is a great story in itself. I love seeing how they overcame their small budget with the funniest tricks I've ever seen. It reminds me a lot of this rock and roll era, except for one thing. That's not After Effects. Adobe After Effects is kind of fucking shit for compositing. It's layer-based, it doesn't have 3D support, and trying to maintain a procedural workflow is a pain in the ass. But in the 2000s, Adobe had that juice. Everyone was doing their VFX in After Effects, and Photoshop was becoming a household verb. But how? How did Adobe become the front man of this movement? Because the alternative, Foundry's Nuke, like we just saw, is the preferred program used by big studios for compositing. It was the de facto program for professional visual effects artists to learn, and it still is today. And I hate to say these words, but for lack of better ones, it's the industry standard. So how did After Effects win? Was it just cheaper? Brother, nobody pays for Adobe, not even Freddie W.
After your 30 days are up, just reinstall your OS and download it again. It'll be great. You'll have the fastest computer of anybody you know because there'll be no viruses and no spyware. In all seriousness, that's what I did for like a year.
What I think reeled in so many users to After Effects was actually that first flaw I mentioned. After Effects was layer-based, as opposed to programs like Nuke being node-based. This made it a lot easier for beginner artists to understand this meant that the effect is on top of the footage, as opposed to this meaning anything. So why were nodes the preferred workflow for big post houses? Why do professionals consistently choose Nuke? And how do I explain this next part without sounding like an ad? Well, nodes allow for heavy compositing. You can infinitely stack all kinds of videos and effects without it getting overwhelming because the program was built for that. It's got a level of visual organization that After Effects fundamentally cannot match. This procedural workflow is primed for when a director wants to change their mind at the last minute. You don't need to dig through folders, comps, and layers. You just need to update the nodes and you're done.
Traditionally, you would have to plan your layering very careful and work from back to front. With deep compositing, we can convert the scene into a 3D representation and place traditional 2D card elements within that view, and we know exactly where to place it.
But if you notice, all of these positives that Nuke offers seem to only benefit the big studios that have to work with other people and answer to higher-ups with constant revisions. Nuke represented the industry. After Effects screamed anarchy. And you can almost feel that in the effects themselves. A blockbuster Compton Nuke is flawless. Every detail accounted for, every element blended seamlessly, every roto pixel perfect, because teams of artists spent weeks polishing the final look to make sure it stands the test of time. But then you watch a YouTube video, Compton After Effects, there's flaws, sure, but here's the thing. One guy did all of it, and I bet you didn't even notice the mistakes the first time.
You can see like right over there, and there's a little bit of tear on there. We know that people's eye is going to be right at Sam running there, so we don't need to worry that much about the other edge of the shot because odds are no one will really ever see it.
It's fucking raw. I can't explain it better than it's rock and roll. It's not made in a vacuum. It's chaotic. The distortion is almost the sound itself. Did you know that the Dire Straits still can't recreate the guitar tone from the track Money for Nothing? They remember exactly how all of their amps and mics were set up when they recorded it, but every time they try to recreate it, it never sounds the same. It always sounds like a cleaner karaoke version of the same thing. They can never re-record that riff without losing what made it so iconic, and they shouldn't. Rock isn't about polish or revisions, it's about hitting render and burning the project file. The last difference is in the effects themselves and what they encouraged. Like, After Effects doesn't have as versatile a toolset as Nuke. For every bass effect in After Effects, like Simple Choker, there's a dozen in Nuke, all with slightly different functions and controls. However, After Effects does come with a bunch of really interesting pre-programmed effects that can give you a head start over someone editing in Nuke. To build anything in Nuke, you already had to have an idea of it in your head before going in, because chances are, you're gonna have to build it from scratch. Nuke is like a classic acoustic guitar. There's no electronics on it to help you. There's no way you can plug in a pedal to immediately sound cool. You just have to sit down and learn it and play. And it's not the most rewarding thing at first, but eventually you can play any song you want just by hearing it. Like if you look at effects like chords, you just need to know what nodes to string together to play it. Like to build a basic lightning effect, you need a roto, noise, copy, distort, and glow. But you see, After Effects is closer to like a Guitar Hero controller. Like it comes pre-built with a lightning effect, you just have to double click on it. This allows you to feel like a rock star without actually knowing how the song is played. And I already hear both sides hating this analogy because yes, there's Nukepedia that has a bunch of free pre-built effects like lightning bolts that you can just drag and drop into your script. And in After Effects, if you really wanted to, you could create a lightning bolt effect in a very similar way to how I created it in Nuke. But have you ever done that? I'm willing to bet not, because why would you? This looks better than any lightning bolt I could ever draw, and it has all these controls to make it look like this took me way longer. And After Effects is full of these weird little pre-built effects, because while it isn't the industry standard for visual effects compositing, it actually is the standard for motion graphics, because after all, that's what the program was originally built for. I know it's called Adobe After Effects, but in reality, it's just an updated version of Adobe Live Motion. They just got a facelift and a PR team. But that's where all the fun of editing in After Effects comes from. Like I said, it's very hard to stay organized and not get overwhelmed. But with these pre-built effects like Advanced Lightning, it almost makes it a game. It becomes a challenge. Like how good could you make this shot look using the fewest effects possible? But what makes it rock and roll is I think how good could you break these effects?
What do you know, and I found that was the most interesting aspect of the new music that we were doing at that time was actually working with synthesizers but throwing the manuals away so that we had no idea how the damn things worked. So if you get the wrong circuits going, you get all these crackles and farts coming out of these things. I mean, it just produces the most extraordinary sounds and different range of textures.
My favorite example of this is in Corridor Digital's Adventure Time video, and it's this noodle arm effect. Now, you'd think it's just another shot with full CG arms like they did previously, but no, they're actually using the time displacement effect, a tool that displaces frames according to a grayscale image. It's intended as a motion design tool. I mean, that's how everyone else uses it, but in the hands of Corridor Digital, it becomes a very unique visual effect. But these are all abstract effects. Lightning bolts and noodle arms. I want to talk about real things like bullets, explosions. You already know what the third thing is. Action Essentials 2! Action Essentials 2 was a bundle of pre-filmed elements for visual effects artists to composite into their shots. It had all kinds of explosions, muzzle flares, and bullet hits, and it was everywhere. Not just on YouTube, but it also reached big-budget film productions. But how did it get there? How did this one DVD end up on every compositor's desk? Because it wasn't the first ever asset pack. I mean, it's called Action Essentials 2, why would you think that? But there were some things that made this pack specifically so popular. The biggest reason was no doubt the price. For as low as $100, you got 500 assets. When most places were charging like $5 to $20 per clip, this was a steal. And most assets online, you had to buy individually. There were still packs sometimes, but they were usually packs of the same thing. Like a smoke pack was just smokes, a fire pack was just fire. But an action pack that had a little bit of everything,
Fuck, it's genius. Why didn't I think of that?
You had enough assets in here to make a Michael Bay trilogy. It had everything you'd ever need. That's what made it popular. But what made it iconic were the assets that you didn't know you needed. Like firecrackers, musket charges, smoke puffs. Who the fuck was asking for these? You would never buy them on their own. But since you already have them, you might as well find a way to use them. And a lot of people did. I've seen the suppressed muzzle flares be used to eject bullet shells and propel rockets, and the charges made for great slow motion muzzle flares. Not only does this harken back to the days of practical effects with all its fun little trivia like, oh, did you know that the blood in Psycho is actually Hershey's chocolate syrup? But I think this also reflected the attitude of rock and roll. Like when bands started fucking around and bringing weird things in the studio. Eddie Van Halen played a power drill on Pound Cake. Kurt Cobain put reverb on a rubber ducky in Drain You. Ringo Starr played the anvil in Maxwell Silver Hammer. And AC/DC's It's a Long Way to the Top, if you want to rock and roll, used bagpipes. And I refuse to recognize bagpipes as a real instrument. But what made Action Essentials 2 so iconic is unfortunately also what killed it. I don't want to get ahead of myself, but there was a point where it became too recognizable. Even non-VFX people can recognize Explosion1.mov. And there's two reasons for that. One, they were filmed wrong. They were shot with a high shutter speed, which is why the elements like blood bursts look so crisp, and you can see every droplet of blood with no motion blur. And they were filmed at 120 frames per second, which is how you film something if you intend on playing it back in slow motion. And I fully understand the idea behind filming it like this. It's a lot easier to add artifacts like motion blur than it is to remove them. And filming at 120 frames per second just means you got some extra frames if you need them. But this does limit them from ever looking as accurate as if they'd been filmed the right way. Now, I'm not trying to start shit, okay? Andrew Kramer, the man who made Action Essentials 2 himself, said this.
When you're doing something exciting, you want to do something slow motion, having a higher frame rate to work with is nice.
Yeah.
But things like liquids, they move so fast that they kind of just look like a blur. And if you speed up something that was shot in slow motion, it looks too choppy, and then it doesn't look like real blood either. So the solution is to shoot blood elements at native frame rates like 24 or 30.
The second reason lies in the marketing. He leaned a little too hard on the drag and drop aspect because that's all these new VFX artists end up doing. They didn't blur the blood, they didn't combine multiple assets, they rarely went beyond rotoscoping objects that were in the way. And yet, isn't that what rock and roll is all about? It's not about polish or checking your meters, it's about being loud, and that's exactly what these assets were. Using slow motion blood effects over real-time footage created a gnarly fucking look, and same with the explosions, it made a larger impact. It wasn't about realism, it was about making something visually impactful. Like, look at muzzle flares. Muzzle flares aren't real, or what I should say is that they're very rare to capture on camera. What you see in films are blanks, special fake bullets that, 1, don't fire a projectile, obviously, and 2, they make the pronounced flare that looks good on camera. They're not accurate, but they're what the public thinks is accurate. Kind of like when old people heard rock and roll for the first time and labeled it devil music, and then bands had no choice but to lean into that.
Somebody threw a chicken on stage. This was in Toronto. And I'm from Detroit. I've never been on a farm in my life, And I said, a chicken, it's got wings, it'll fly. So I threw it back in the audience. I thought it was going to fly away, in the sunset. It went right into the audience, and the audience tore it to pieces and threw the parts back up on stage. Now, the next thing I knew, it was Alice Cooper bites head off chicken and drinks the blood. And that's what the paper said the next day. And I got a call the next day from Frank Zappa. And he says, did you do that? And I said, no. He said, well, don't tell anybody that. He said, they love it.
There's also something just funny about faking an already fake thing. Like, Freddie W. used to put firecrackers over his blood hits so that they looked like squibs, because it's impossible to convince you that he really shot a dude for a YouTube video, but maybe he could trick you into thinking that he did this effect practically, and that feels a little bit more real. Little tricks like these are genius, but rock isn't about subtlety. What took these muzzle flares to the next level was that light that they emitted. There's thousands of different tutorials from this time, and they all have their own little unique trademarks, but all of them involve faking a bright light on the actor and the area around the gun, which again is not based in reality. This is pure rock and roll, choosing to make something visually striking over accuracy. However, they will deny this. Both Freddie W. and Corridor Digital have cited clips from movies using blanks at night to justify their muzzle flares being brighter than the sun. I wish they didn't. I wish they just came forward and admitted they did this because it looks cool. It would help with my thesis. That was the rock and roll era of visual effects. Self-taught artists using a motion design program to bring their action movie fantasies to life. It was raw, it was loud, and it was fabulous.
Whoa! Haha, you missed me.
And I don't want to point fingers at who killed this era, but I will. YouTube definitely played the biggest role in its downfall. It got stricter with its censorship around violence, and the algorithm shifted to favor long-form content over short, high-quality videos. Then there was the death of Action Essentials 2, which we already went over. It was just loved too damn much and got overused. But on top of that, there was also Action VFX, a website that had way more action assets than Action Essentials, but this time they were filmed in 4K and with the proper camera settings. And After Effects is still alive today, but the raw style of compositing that we know and love is dead. Honestly, the artists that defined this era kinda had the luxury of these effects being new. People today love to complain about shots and films being so blatantly filmed on a green screen, but if you look at them, they're pretty well composited. They just look green screen because of poor shot design. The actors are always the only things in the foreground, and the background is always too far away and out of focus. But then you look at music videos from this rock and roll era and yikes. And yes, there is a stylistic element here. They weren't always aiming for realism, but the chroma keying can be objectively bad. Like, look at the pre-multiplication errors on Gwen Stefani. I think it's just that the charm of raw visual effects is over. It's no longer impressive that you know After Effects. Now it's what can you do with it?
You can no longer earn somebody's sense of satisfaction just because you dazzled them visually.
So it's safe to say that this era is dead, and I don't know if we'll ever see anything like it ever again. But before we close the book on it, let's discuss who did it best. Who took everything from this era, the dirty compositing, the raw assets, and transformed them into something that still stood apart. Something unmistakably built on rock and roll VFX, yet without the blood or bullets. Who destroyed something perfect in order to make it beautiful? The answer comes from where you might least expect it. My Chemical Romance is a rock band. They're from New Jersey, they formed in 2001, and they have only released 4 studio albums. You're probably most familiar with their third album, The Black Parade, and the song Welcome to the Black Parade. The music video for that, to say the least, changed America. It was directed by Sam Bayer, featured Lucas Haas, but most importantly, the visual effects were supervised by Andrew Sinagara and composited at the Entropic Post House by artists like Nathan Robinson. But we're not here to talk about that album or its music videos, because it's their 4th album, Danger Days, The True Lives of the Fabulous Killjoys That Changed Me. The music video for Na 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 was directed by Robert Schober. The visual effects were done by Robert Schober, and it even features Robert Schober. As a lifelong My Chemical Romance fan who's been obsessed with visual effects for as long as I remember, it was no joke the greatest honor of my life to get to interview Robert Schober, aka Robo Shobo, who created the music video that made me the artist I am today. And he was also amazing enough to share with me never before seen photos, videos, and stories about the production of Na Na Na, which not only perfectly embodies this rock and roll era that we have outlined, but it also shows us where we're going. Let's get the only somewhat contradiction to my thesis out of the way. I said that YouTube was a defining force in this rock and roll era, and yet Robert is not a YouTuber. He does not make YouTube videos, nor did he teach himself how to composite with YouTube. However, his work has been seen by millions on YouTube. Na 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 alone has nearly 100 million views, and if you add up all the other music videos he's directed, you get over 850 million. And I know Jimmy Fallon gets billions of views on YouTube. That doesn't make him a YouTuber. Fair. He makes his stuff for television. YouTube is just an afterthought. But let me ask you this. Where else do you even watch music videos? It's not like you go onto MTV. YouTube is really the only place where you can watch Robert's work. Bitch. I also said that Robert didn't teach himself VFX with YouTube. His career started before then, but he was still self-taught. How? This Goodwill hunting motherfucker dropped out of college to go to Barnes & Noble and read books about how to do visual effects. He hand-copied notes from textbooks about Adobe Live Motion on notebook paper. Then he went home, taught himself through trial and error. He did this until he had enough for a portfolio. Then he packed up, headed to Los Angeles, got himself an agent, and became a director. And dog, you're not even ready for this next one. You know the program Blender? Maybe you first heard of it in 2024 with that weird subdivision trend on TikTok. Maybe in 2022 when it was used in Everything Everywhere All at Once. But VFX artists, we've been known about Blender. And if you personally know the program, I'm willing to bet that you learned it from one of two people. There's Andrew Price, aka Blender Guru, who's known for his donut tutorials that he makes every single time Blender rolls out a new update. Or there's Ian Hubert and his lazy tutorials, where in under a minute he creates an entire effect. They've both been making great videos for a long time now, and a lot of Blender artists, myself included, cite them as the ones that made Blender accessible. But here's the thing. Ian Hubert's first tutorial was uploaded in 2019, and Blender Guru's first video was in 2012. And yet Robert Schober made an entire music video in Blender in 2006. Do you know how fucking insane that is? And I know you're looking at it and thinking it's not much. Robert was even embarrassed to send this to me. But listen, as someone who, not to brag, is pretty smooth in the Blenders today, you have to believe me when I say how impressive this is. Even now, with all the tutorials and information available today, people still struggle to tame the program that is Blender. So the fact that Robert Schober modeled, rigged, and animated an entire music video with a 2006 version of Blender, fucking sane. That is what makes Robert a part of this era. To reiterate, Robert only directed the first Danger Days music video, Na Na Na. The second one, Sing, was made by an entirely different team of creatives. Different director, different DP, different VFX artists. I think the band themselves were the only thing that carried over into the next video. But that difference showcases a clear contrast between a regular director and one that fucks. Because the one that fucks knows visual effects. You see, our world is dominated by screens. TVs, phones, computers. I'm on a screen within a screen. Fuck, I'm probably on your second monitor while you play on your phone. Point is, screens aren't going away, and as the director or the director of photography, you need to know how to properly film for screen replacements. Let's look at Na 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 in this bend hack gadget, which you're probably just now realizing was a visual effects shot. Yeah, this text was animated on the screen in post. Nothing fancy, it's only 2 super fast insert shots, not meant to be overanalyzed like I'm about to do now. But let's break it down. This grid is a real part of the physical screen, and would you look at how easy that is to motion track. I get bricked up just looking at it. And also, it's not like when you put tape on a screen for tracking markers, because when you do that, you still have to digitally remove the tape afterwards. But this grid, you could just leave it in. It blends into the prop. This one trick ensured that Robert would have an easy time in post. It gave him 100 perfect tracking markers right on the screen, so this effect could be done super fast and look perfect. A typical non-VFX director wouldn't even know to think about this. But as much as I want to keep praising Schober right now, I do have to clarify. This actually was apparently just a coincidence. Apparently that part of the prop came from an old LCD video game console where the grid was printed into the screen. Robert even thanks Jason Fidgel, the art director, for making a prop that was so easily trackable. But credit where credit is due, damn it. Every visual effects artist watching this knows damn well that any other director who wasn't thinking about VFX would have still found a way to fuck this shot up. So Robert also took the time to instruct the DP to shoot the shot flat and clean, and he also instructed the actress to keep her fingers clear of the screen so he didn't have to do any rotoscoping. And that is the only screen in Na Na Na, and it still got that much preparation. Probably because visual effects artists hate doing screen replacements, but directors love putting screens in their films. For instance, let's look at the screens in Sing. Look at how many of them there are, and notice how many of them are just blank. And I think I can say why. Remember, I'm just guessing here. I didn't work on the music video, but I've worked on my fair share. And when it comes to screen replacements, there's typically 2 things that directors do without a VFX background or a VFX supervisor. 1, they don't properly prep the screen, and 2, half the time, they don't even know what they want on the screen. Like, look at the security TV coming in from a hot 90-degree angle. Notice how it slides up at the top because there was nothing on the screen to track. And then, look at what's on the screen. It's a different shot from the music video that doesn't actually make sense as a security camera. Probably because they forgot to film dedicated security footage for all these computer monitors. That's why they're all blank. And also, if you hear any bitterness in my voice, it's not aimed at anybody who worked on this music video, obviously. But like I said, I have to do shots like this every single day. And you'd think directors would know by now how to properly prep screens, but they don't. But if you did work on this music video and are hating me right now, I'd like to try to win you back. I once did visual effects for a TV show a while back, and I don't watch the show, I don't know anything about the plot, but I got the sense that this was a rescue scene. And it reminded me a lot of Sing, especially this shot looks just like this shot to me. And that spiritually compelled me to just put my whole pussy into this project. So I started adding things like bullet tracers, and I just started going crazy with it. I wanted to feel chaotic and as badass as that shot from Sing. But while I was working on it, my boss walked over and went, "What the fuck are you doing? It looks like Star Wars. Are those laser beams?" And point is, I flew too close to the sun, and I had to tone it down. I'm just trying to say that the effects in this music video mean a lot to me, and I'm very aware it's a lot easier to criticize something than to create them. And also, while I was pulling clips from that show that I worked on, I found some screens in the background that I forgot to do. My bad. I take back all my criticism. When you clicked on a video about the visual effects in the Danger Days music videos, I bet you didn't imagine it'd take this long to get to the laser beams. But here we are. So how are they made? To find out, I first tried to reverse engineer them, drawing the rough shape with the pen tool and then playing with various blurs and glows in After Effects. But by the time I got close to the look, it became so much of a process that there was no way that this is how Robert did it. It was too convoluted, and having to redraw the lasers every single time surely would have caused them to change shape, but the beams in Na 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 are consistently girthy. So I went on YouTube and I looked up laser beam tutorials from around that time. And there were a lot that were just doing the exact same method I just tried, but I found one that did something really unique. They started with the advanced lightning effect. They set it to striking and dropped all the details down to 0. So now you have a consistent beam that you can animate in color super easily. Again, using motion design tools in ways they were never meant to be used because it works. That's rock and roll. I tried this out and the beams were the exact same as the ones in Na Na Na. And just for confirmation, I did ask Robert about the laser beams. I asked if by any chance he used the advanced lightning effect, and he said, I believe so. Pretty impressive. Now, I didn't ask him specifically if he watched that tutorial because that would have been like 15 years ago and I doubt he would remember. But here's the thing. That tutorial was made by what sounds like a 10-year-old child.
Hello guys, what's up? Today I'm going to teach you how to make a laser beam in Adobe After Effects CS4.
So I really want to believe that he did watch that video because that's what this era is all about. Random YouTube tutorials made by young artists affecting big budget music videos, but also it's entirely possible that Robert just discovered this method on his own. I remember constantly dicking around in After Effects in my free time and finding out cool ways to use effects, like CC Mercury. I've always wanted to do something dirty with CC Mercury. But what about the Sing music video? Because remember, those were made by an entirely different visual effects artist, not our boy Robo Shobo. Also, this video required like 50 times more laser beams, but they also somehow took the extra time to add motion blur. Robert only did that one time in Na 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 before saying fuck that and never doing it again.
Actually, I found a couple more with motion blur. I'm sorry I ever doubted you, Robert. My bad.
So what's happening here? How does the Sing music video have more laser beams and with a higher level of polish? The difference is in how they were animated. Robert opted to animate the beginning and end points of the beam within the advanced lightning effect. This is why they can move at inconsistent speeds and sometimes vary in length. I'm willing to bet that he animated them frame by frame, which also means he couldn't enable the motion blur effect because that is dependent upon the position value of the layer, which in his case does not change. But the beams in Sing do. What they actually did was they created the beam once and then animated the position value. Frame 1, put it here, frame 5, put it over here, and this allows for the beam to stay the same size, travel at the same speed, and it also allows them to turn on motion blur. However, the motion blur effect blurs the laser in the direction of travel. It doesn't know which way the laser is facing. That's why sometimes the beams in Sing can look like parallelograms. Also, you should always animate the keyframes past the frame they end on. Otherwise, there'll be a frame with no blur like this laser right here. It's a common mistake. Even the higher budget productions do it too. Here it is in The Walking Dead. Look at this blood burst just freezing the air on the last frame. Now, both of these methods are still rock and roll. They both use After Effects, they both use the advanced lightning effect the wrong way, and they both potentially watched that video made by a 10-year-old. But I love the ones in Na 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 so much more. They don't feel as copy and paste as the ones in Sing. And if I can be a little bit more cringe than I have already, they fit the lore. There's a whole page in the Danger Days comics about how everything has a spirit and there's waves everywhere. And when you fire your gun, the blast can ride those waves and get the perfect shot every time. That's what the lasers in Na 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 resemble to me, like a living spirit with more than just 2 keyframes. I might be glazing a little bit too much though. Let's go back to Sing. I think it's very fitting that the first thing we see in the Sing music video is a lens flare, immediately telling you that this is going to be like no other My Chemical Romance music video. We are no longer in a 16:9 aspect ratio. We are in fucking Cinescope. The video doesn't even open with the music. The first thing we hear is the Trans Am, and the first thing we see is it barreling down the tunnel from Blade Runner. And then you're like, what the fuck am I in for? What have you done, My Chemical Romance? And then Sing plays, the only My Chem song to have a Kids Bop cover. But back to those lens flares. I'll admit, they're a little bit outside my area of expertise. I've never had to add a stylistic lens flare to anything I've worked on, and I really don't know lenses. I can't tell which ones are real and which ones are added in post. Here's what the camera looked like on set if there's any nerds who want to weigh in, but I'm willing to bet that all the flares were fake because damn, they show up everywhere, even on these buttons. But here's the thing. Lens flares aren't anything new. We've seen Hollywood run them into the ground, and even J.J. Abrams, the director who's known for abusing them, never used them as anything more than a filter. But in the hands of a new age, rock and roll visual effects artists, they become something more than just a cheap effect. When Gerard Way dies, spoiler by the way, when Gerard Way dies, before we see any kind of muzzle flash or laser of any sort, we first see a lens flare that shines so bright it transitions us into the next shot. Grant Morrison killed Gerard Way with a lens flare. This is pure cinema, okay? Using an effect so wrong that it's right. Disregarding all consistency, all logic, I don't care, to make the most visually striking thing imaginable. If I did the VFX in this music video, my reel would be these 11 frames alone. And I cannot wait to see what's in the third music video.
We'll see you in the next video where this will get used. So, take care.
Gerard, we're still waiting. When I first got my hands on Action Essentials 2, I remember joking with my best friend Jason that we should make an entire action movie that uses every single clip from the pack. And I think that whoever did the VFX for Sing must have made that same joke at some point, because holy shit did they get close. They used the couch hits, particle hits, glass hits, smoke plumes, there's sparks coming out of the guns, sparks coming out of the ceiling, sparks coming out of the car, sparks coming out of this dude. They even used the burn textures that were in the last folder of Action Essentials 2. I think Andrew Kramer only threw those in there to hit an even 20 elements, but would you look at that? Robert even used them too. They stretched the shit out of this poor little DVD, but for every conventional asset that they didn't use, like the traditional muzzle flares, they doubled down with the more abstract ones. Like Sing used the firecracker elements for their, we'll call them laser flares. But Robert, in my opinion, had the better idea to use the suppressed flares that were originally meant for when a gun has a silencer at the end, but damn, don't they look better as laser flares? And the key is in the inconsistency, not locking your effect down to one asset. Like, he also used firecrackers in Na Na Na, but the best was during the cowboy shootout scene, where Gerard Way is in a standoff with a Draculoid and he quickly fires from the hip, and we don't see a suppressed flare or a firecracker, but a good old-fashioned musket rifle charge. With one quick asset swap, he made a ray gun feel like a six-shooter. That is how you use an asset to tell a story. Let's talk particle hits. Traditionally, particle hits are scaled down. They're most often used when a bullet hits like a tree or something. They're usually pretty small in the frame. But when the last Killjoy, Ray Toro, the greatest guitarist of our generation, gets shot, we see a 6-foot particle hit. It makes no logical sense, but gosh dang does this not make you feel the impact of the blast. It's less of a bullet hit and more of like a shockwave. And would you look at that roto? I don't think they spent longer than 2 seconds on that, and it works. You don't need to rotoscope every strand of his hair to know that he just fucking died. Again, polish is for losers. Rock stars use their garbage mats.
I haven't gone down there either. Never been down there.
The last asset worth mentioning unfortunately makes a great anecdote for the VFX industry today. This explosion that happens at the beginning in Na 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 was actually the first shot that I reconstructed. It was Dirt Charge 4 on top of Explosion 2, and it was one of the first things I sent to Robert to prove that I'm taking this interview seriously, and I'm on his ass. Then he told me that that was actually one of the last shots added to the music video. Apparently the editor said an explosion would really help with the edit. It would launch us into the story faster. So Robert took a random plate, slapped some Action Essentials 2 on there, and called it a day. And there's nothing wrong with that. I'm not going to argue that Robert sent us down this path, but I think that visual effects artists constantly saving the day and saving studios tons of money plays a significant part as to why we're in the fix-it and post era. Ironically though, this shitty side of modern day visual effects was actually my favorite part of talking with Robert, when we both started sharing stories of fixing dumb shit in post. Like, he once worked on a Big Singer's music video just as a visual effects artist, and one of the things they wanted changed was apparently there were footprints on the floor that were distracting. Not distracting enough to take the 10 minutes to physically clean them, but they were distracting enough that it justified Robert spending 72 hours at the studio manually painting them out. Then we started talking about sleep deprivation and what that does to your brain. He said there was a point where he just stared at his hands and wondered if they were real, which sounds crazy, but there was one time that I was working on a music video where the lights didn't animate the way they were supposed to on set, and they were just like, they'll animate those in post. How hard could that be? I'm not even kidding. It required me completely replacing the entire set in Blender, and I only had 2 days. And around hour 20 of straight raw dogging visual effects, it was 4 a.m. and I began to forget basic shortcuts. I was trying to save my project. I was looking at my keyboard and I went Control S. And then I heard laughter, and I looked up, and my boss and a coworker were behind my desk laughing, and I started smiling and laughing and trying to play along, and then I blinked, and they were gone. I dreamt that shit. I talked to Robert about visual effects for so long that I kind of forgot that he's a director first. When he told me that his favorite videos of his are the ones with little to no visual effects, I was kind of offended. Like, I'm a visual effects artist first and foremost. I'm CGI till I die. It really caught me off guard when he was talking about this effect in Na Na Na, and we said he hopes it's apparent that this was a real stunt and a practical effect. And I was like, would it be so bad if that was a visual effect? But since starting this project, and a big reason as to why it took so long to make, is that I've been working on other people's movies. And honestly, I think I get it now. I'm tired of modern visual effects. I'm tired of spending weeks removing crew members in the background or wires left on the floor. I'm tired of articles saying that the latest blockbuster has no VFX when it is 90% CGI. I'm tired of all the negative stigma CGI has. People hear CGI and think the computer did all the work, when all that bitch did was calculate the light rays. People would rather shit on a digital shot that was created by a human than a practical set piece that was generated by a computer. And I hope it's not too late to fix some of these problems, to get people to fall back in love with VFX. Maybe the golden age of visual effects hasn't even happened yet. And I know that sounds dumb and naive and optimistic, but damn it, we've seen this industry change before. Look at what the rock and roll era has done. If you've ever wondered why artists like Freddie Wong and Mike Diva don't make YouTube videos anymore, it's because they made it. Freddie is now making big budget TV shows and award-winning films, and Mike Diva is a director at Saturday Night Live. And you best believe that they're putting their visual effects skills to use and no doubt raising another generation of storytellers. Speaking of SNL, would you look at what programs they're using? That's right, After Effects snuck its way into the industry too. So knowing After Effects might not get you a job at ILM, but it could get you one at SNL. That's kind of cool. And look at what's happened with Nuke. It was a little late to the party, but it's currently in the midst of a somewhat rock and roll era. You used to have to go to college to learn it, and now Foundry lets you download it for free, and they upload full in-depth tutorials to YouTube. And a lot of other YouTubers have been making great tutorials with Nuke too. Is that my video? It's embarrassing. How'd that get in there? And look at how much blockbusters have changed since this era. Look at what Keanu Reeves' muzzle flares used to look like, and look at them now. They look straight out of a film riot tutorial, and I have no doubt that this was a direct result of this era. So no matter how grim it looks, never forget, art is the weapon. Thank you so much for watching.